I never thought I'd be the one to bring down our homeowners association president, but life has a way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect them. My name is Jack Fowler, and this is the story of how I uncovered a $750,000 embezzlement scheme, watched an infamous HOA president try to flee to Mexico, and ultimately helped the FBI put her away for 12 years. It all started on a sweltering July morning in Suncrest Meadows, a supposedly upscale suburban development in Phoenix, Arizona. I was examining the mysterious brown patches spreading across my previously lush lawn when my next-door neighbor, Oliver Martinez, stormed over with a crumpled paper in his hand. "Jack, have you seen this month's HOA fee increase?" Oliver waved the notice in my face. "It's the third hike this year. My wife and I are paying almost double what we paid when we moved in 2 years ago." I grabbed the notice and squinted at the numbers. Indeed, our monthly HOA fees had jumped from $275 to $320. The letterhead featured the elegant signature of our HOA president, Olivia Thompkins, alongside a brief explanation citing infrastructure improvements and landscaping upgrades. "This is getting ridiculous," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "What infrastructure are they even talking about?" "The community pool's been closed for renovations for months, and look at our lawns. They're dying despite the so-called professional landscaping we're paying for." Oliver shook his head. "Something doesn't add up." Karen from down the street told me she tried to see the financial statements, and Olivia gave her some runaround about the records being under review. That was the moment the first seed of suspicion took root in my mind. I'd lived in Suncrest Meadows for 4 years, and while our HOA had always been strict about everything from mailbox colors to holiday decorations, the financial management had never raised eyebrows until Olivia Thompkins took over the presidency 18 months ago. "I think I'll go to the next board meeting," I told Oliver. "Maybe ask some questions." Little did I know that innocent decision would send me down a rabbit hole of financial fraud, intimidation, and ultimately a high-stakes chase to the Mexican border. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening in our community center, a once impressive building now showing signs of neglect despite our increasing fees. About 30 residents showed up, more than usual, most likely drawn by the recent fee increase. Olivia Thompkins sat at the center of the board table, a woman in her mid-40s with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a perpetual expression that suggested she was smelling something unpleasant. Flanking her were the other board members: Ted Russo, the vice president, Maria Garcia, the secretary, and Philip Chen, the treasurer. "Before we address individual concerns," Olivia announced after calling the meeting to order, "I want to remind everyone that these fee increases are essential for maintaining our property values. We're in the process of upgrading our irrigation systems, renovating the pool, and improving security. We understand it's an inconvenience, but it's for the greater good of our community." I raised my hand, and after pointedly ignoring me for several minutes, Olivia finally acknowledged me with a tight smile. "Yes, Mr. Fowler. I'm curious about the specific allocation of funds," I said. "The pool has been under renovation for nearly 6 months now with no visible progress. Is there a detailed budget breakdown residents can review?" Olivia's smile remained fixed, but her eyes turned cold. "Our treasurer prepares quarterly financial reports. However, the current quarter isn't complete and the previous report is being audited. We'll make everything available once the process is complete." Philip Chen, the treasurer, nodded mechanically beside her. I noticed he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. "Actually," piped up Karen Davis, a woman notorious for her complaints about everything from children playing too loudly to improper trash bin placement, "I've been requesting last year's financial statement for months now. As homeowners, don't we have a legal right to see where our money is going?" I never thought I'd find myself agreeing with Karen, but she had a point. Several other residents murmured in agreement. As I've explained repeatedly, Olivia said, her tone sharpening. "We're in the middle of transitioning to new accounting software. Some historical reports aren't currently accessible. Now, can we move on to other business?" The meeting continued, with Olivia efficiently shutting down further questions about finances by redirecting the conversation to violations of community guidelines. By the end, she had issued warnings to 3 homeowners about unapproved exterior paint colors and reminded everyone about the prohibition on visible basketball hoops. As people filed out after the meeting, I approached Philip Chen. Up close, he looked stressed, with dark circles under his eyes. "Philip, I'm Jack Fowler from Seguero Lane. I was wondering if I could talk to you privately about the HOA finances." He glanced nervously over my shoulder, and I turned to see Olivia watching us intently while pretending to organize her papers. "I am not authorized to discuss financial matters outside of official channels," Philip stammered. "I understand, but as the treasurer, I really can't help you," he interrupted, gathering his belongings hastily. "Please direct all inquiries to the president." As he hurried away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with our HOA's finances, and Philip knew it. Over the next few days, I started asking questions around the neighborhood and doing some research online about homeowners' rights to financial information. Arizona state law was clear. HOA boards were required to make financial records available to members upon reasonable notice. I drafted a formal letter requesting access to the association's financial records for the past 2 years and delivered it to Olivia's house. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from Thompkins HOA Management, which I later learned was a fake company Olivia had created, informing me that my request would require extensive document preparation and would cost $850 in administrative fees payable in advance. This only deepened my suspicions. I shared my concerns with Oliver and a few other neighbors, and we decided to form a small committee to investigate further. Among us was Rachel Johnson, a retired accountant who immediately identified the administrative fee as excessive and likely illegal. "They can charge reasonable costs for copying, but $850 is absurd," Rachel said as we gathered in my living room. "And what's this Thompkins HOA Management? Our association is supposed to be managed by Desert Horizon Management Company, according to our CCRs." We decided to contact Desert Horizon directly, only to discover they had been dismissed as the management company over a year ago, supposedly due to performance issues. Yet our HOA fees were still being sent to an account with their name, which Olivia had apparently maintained control over. "This is starting to look like fraud," said Owen Willis, another neighbor who worked as a paralegal. "We should consider filing a complaint with the Attorney General's office." While the others nodded in agreement, I had another idea. "Before we go that route, let's try one more thing. My cousin works at Arizona First Bank. Maybe she can tell us if there's anything unusual about the HOA's accounts without violating any privacy laws." My cousin Janet couldn't give me specific information about the accounts, but she confirmed something troubling. The HOA's main account had been changed from a business account to a personal account with dual signatures required belonging to Olivia Thompkins and Philip Chen. This was highly irregular for an HOA. Armed with this information, we convened an emergency meeting with as many homeowners as we could gather. About 50 people crowded into the community center. Olivia was notably absent, having left town for what she described as an emergency board training conference in San Diego. Philip Chen, however, was present, looking increasingly uncomfortable as we presented our findings. When confronted directly, he broke down. "I never wanted to be part of this," he confessed, his voice shaking. "She said it was just temporary borrowing to cover shortfalls, but then it kept growing. She controls everything. She threatened to sue me for defamation if I spoke up. She has all these connections with lawyers." "How much money are we talking about, Philip?" Rachel asked gently. He looked at the floor. At least $750,000 over the past 18 months. The room erupted in shock and anger. $750,000 stolen from our community of 212 homes. That explained the fee increases, the neglected maintenance, the endless excuses. "We need to call the police right now," someone shouted. "And get a forensic accountant," added Rachel. I pulled Philip aside as the room devolved into chaotic planning. "Do you have any documentation?" "Bank statements, transfers, anything that shows what happened to the money," he nodded slowly. "I kept copies of everything. I was too scared to use them, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy them either." Within hours, we had filed a police report with the Phoenix PD's Financial Crimes Unit. Philip handed over a USB drive containing 18 months of financial records, showing systematic transfers from the HOA account to multiple personal accounts controlled by Olivia, as well as falsified financial statements she had presented to the board. The detective assigned to our case, Detective Sarah Williams, was impressed with the documentation we provided. "This is about as clear-cut as embezzlement cases get," she said after reviewing the files. "But recovering the money might be challenging. Do you know where Miss Thompkins is right now?" That's when we realized no one had been able to reach Olivia since our suspicions became public. Her conference in San Diego was fictional calls to the hotel confirmed no such event was taking place. Her house appeared empty, with mail piling up, and her luxury SUV was gone from the driveway. "I think she's running," I said, a sinking feeling in my stomach. Detective Williams immediately put out an alert for Olivia and her vehicle. The investigation quickly escalated, with the FBI getting involved due to the substantial amount stolen and the possibility that Olivia had crossed state lines. 2 days later, I received a call from Detective Williams. "We've traced some wire transfers," she said. "Miss Thompkins has been moving money to a bank in Cabo San Lucas for months. We think she's heading for Mexico. The FBI has alerted Border Patrol." The next 48 hours were tense. Our neighborhood became the center of local news coverage, with reporters camped outside the community gates, interviewing shocked residents. The story of the HOA president who embezzled nearly $1 million from her own community struck a chord, especially when details emerged about how Olivia had used the money to fund an extravagant lifestyle designer clothes, exotic vacations, and even a small yacht docked in San Diego. Then came the call we'd been waiting for. Detective Williams sounded triumphant. They got her at the Nogales border crossing. She was trying to cross into Mexico with over $50,000 in cash, multiple credit cards, and a new passport under the name Olivia Thomas. The FBI has her in custody. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but our ordeal was far from over. The legal process was just beginning, and recovering the stolen funds would prove to be a complex challenge. In the months that followed, I found myself deeply involved in the case, working with the prosecutor's office to provide evidence and context. Our HOA had to be completely restructured, with an interim board appointed by the court until new elections could be held. An independent auditor was brought in to assess the full extent of the damage. The final tally was staggering: $752,843 embezzled over 19 months. Olivia had methodically drained our reserves, diverted our monthly fees, and even taken out a fraudulent loan in the HOA's name. The renovations she claimed to be managing were either fictitious or performed by shell companies she controlled, which charged exorbitant rates for minimal work. The preliminary hearing was an eye-opener. Olivia, now dressed in a standard-issue jumpsuit instead of her usual designer outfits, pleaded not guilty despite the mountain of evidence. Her attorney attempted to shift blame to Philip Chen, claiming he was the mastermind and she was merely negligent in her oversight. The judge wasn't buying it. With Philip's testimony and the meticulous financial records he'd preserved, the prosecution had a strong case. Olivia was denied bail due to being a flight risk, and the case was set for trial. Meanwhile, our community was dealing with the aftermath. We discovered that our insurance policy, which should have covered employee and director dishonesty, had been allowed to lapse, another of Olivia's cost-cutting measures that now looked deliberately sinister. The new board had to implement another fee increase to cover essential services and begin rebuilding our reserves, which didn't sit well with residents already feeling victimized. Tensions ran high at community meetings. Some blamed Philip for not speaking up sooner. Others criticized long-term board members who had rubber-stamped Olivia's decisions. A few even pointed fingers at me and the other homeowners who had uncovered the scheme, irrationally suggesting we should have noticed earlier. If you hadn't been so busy criticizing Karen Davis for reporting your unapproved garden shed, maybe you would have paid attention to where your money was going, shouted one particularly irate resident during a heated meeting. It was a tough period for everyone, but slowly, we began to heal as a community. The FBI's asset recovery team managed to freeze several of Olivia's accounts and seize her property, including the yacht and a vacation home in Palm Springs we hadn't even known about. While we wouldn't recover everything, it looked like we might get back as much as 60% of the stolen funds. As the trial approached, I received a surprising call from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They wanted me to testify about how I had first become suspicious, and the steps our homeowner group had taken to investigate before involving law enforcement. Apparently, my testimony would help establish the timeline and impact of Olivia's crimes. The trial itself was surreal. Sitting in the witness box, I found myself staring directly at Olivia Thompkins, the woman who had once lectured me about my mailbox being 2 inches taller than regulations permitted. Now she sat beside her defense attorney, her previously perfect hair grown out, showing dark roots against the blonde. Mr. Fowler, the prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Melissa Jordan began, "Could you please tell the court when you first became concerned about Miss Thompkins' management of the Homeowners Association funds?" I detailed the fee increases, the deteriorating amenities, and the increasingly evasive answers from the board. I explained how a group of concerned homeowners had come together to investigate, and how Philip Chen had eventually provided the crucial evidence. During cross-examination, Olivia's attorney tried to portray our group as having a personal vendetta against his client. "Isn't it true that Miss Thompkins had cited you for multiple violations of community guidelines during her tenure?" he asked. "Yes," I admitted. "She cited most homeowners for various infractions, but that had nothing to do with our concerns about financial mismanagement." "And you took it upon yourself to investigate these supposed financial irregularities rather than following proper channels?" "We did follow proper channels," I countered. "We made formal requests for financial information, as is our legal right as association members. When those requests were stonewalled or met with excessive fees, we became more suspicious. The evidence against Olivia was overwhelming. Bank records showed systematic transfers to her personal accounts. Email correspondence revealed how she had intimidated Philip and other board members into silence. Perhaps most damning was her attempt to flee the country with cash and a fake passport. Philip's testimony was particularly powerful. He explained how Olivia had initially approached him with what seemed like a reasonable temporary solution to a cash flow problem, borrowing from reserves to cover some unexpected expenses, with plans to repay it from upcoming dues. But that borrowing never stopped, and soon she was fabricating vendors, creating fake invoices, and altering bank statements to hide her actions. "She told me no one would notice," Philip testified, visibly shaking. "She said homeowners never read financial statements anyway, and by the time anyone caught on, we'd have figured out a way to cover it. When I threatened to resign, she reminded me that I had signed off on everything and would go down with her." After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury needed only 4 hours to reach a verdict: guilty on all counts, including embezzlement, wire fraud, identity theft for the fake passport, and attempting to flee prosecution. The sentencing hearing a month later was the final chapter in Olivia's reign over Suncrest Meadows. The judge allowed several homeowners to provide victim impact statements, describing how the theft had affected their lives. "My husband and I are retired and on a fixed income," said Alina Parsons, an 82-year-old resident. "The increases in HOA fees meant we had to cut back on medications some months. To think that money was funding Miss Thompkins' vacations is simply heartbreaking." When it was Olivia's turn to speak, she offered a half-hearted apology that focused more on the hardship of her detention than on acknowledging the impact of her crimes. "I never meant for things to go this far," she said, dabbing at non-existent tears. "I had every intention of paying everything back. The stress of managing the association led to poor judgment on my part." The judge wasn't moved. "Miss Thompkins, you have shown a profound breach of trust," she said during sentencing. "You were elected to protect your community's interests, and instead, you systematically stole from your neighbors over an extended period. Your actions demonstrate premeditation, deceit, and a complete disregard for the consequences to others." She sentenced Olivia to 12 years in federal prison, ordered full restitution of the $752,843, and imposed a $250,000 fine. As Olivia was led away, I felt no satisfaction, only relief that the ordeal was finally over. The aftermath of the Thompkins case brought significant changes to Suncrest Meadows. The new board, elected 3 months after Olivia's conviction, implemented strict financial controls, including quarterly independent audits and complete transparency in budgeting. All financial documents were now posted on a community portal accessible to every homeowner. The FBI's asset recovery yielded better results than initially expected. They managed to seize and liquidate properties and investments purchased with the stolen funds, ultimately recovering about $520,000. Combined with our insurance claim, which was honored after we proved the policy lapse was part of the fraud, we recouped nearly 85% of our losses. More importantly, our community began to heal. The once fractious relationship between homeowners and the board evolved into a collaborative partnership. The new board, led by Rachel Johnson as president, approached rule enforcement with common sense rather than rigid adherence to every line of the CCRs. 6 months after Olivia's sentencing, we finally celebrated the reopening of our community pool, properly renovated this time, with legitimate contractors and transparent bidding. As families gathered for the opening day barbecue, there was a palpable sense that we had not only survived a crisis, but emerged stronger for it. Oliver approached me as I was flipping burgers for the crowd. "You know, Jack, if you hadn't stuck your neck out and started asking questions, she might have gotten away with it," he said, handing me a beer. "Most people would have just complained and paid the higher fees." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I just couldn't stand the hypocrisy. She was nitpicking everyone's yards while stealing our money. Besides, I had help. Philip was the real hero. He risked everything by coming forward. Philip, who had received immunity in exchange for his cooperation, had moved away shortly after the trial, too embarrassed to face the community despite widespread recognition that his testimony had been crucial. I heard he'd found a job in Tucson and was slowly rebuilding his life. The Thompkins case had far-reaching effects beyond our community. It triggered a state legislative review of HOA governance in Arizona, resulting in the Suncrest Act, a bill requiring stricter financial controls, mandatory bonding for board members with financial responsibilities, and enhanced rights for homeowners to access records. Journalists and legal experts studied our case as an extreme example of how HOAs, which govern an estimated 74 million Americans, can sometimes operate with insufficient oversight. Several neighboring communities conducted forensic audits of their own finances as a precautionary measure. As for me, I found myself reluctantly drawn into HOA leadership. Despite my initial protests, I was elected to the board the following year, taking on the role of vice president with a special focus on community engagement. I made it my mission to ensure that homeowners felt heard and that the board operated with complete transparency. A year to the day after Olivia's sentencing, I received an unexpected letter forwarded by the prosecutor's office. The return address was the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California. With some trepidation, I opened it to find a handwritten note from Olivia Thompkins. "Mr. Fowler," it began, "I've had a lot of time to reflect on my actions and their impact on the community I once served. While I know words do little to repair the damage I caused, I want you to know that I truly regret betraying the trust placed in me. The shame I feel is my constant companion now. I am working with my counselors here to understand the choices I made and ensure I never repeat them. Please convey my sincere apologies to everyone at Suncrest Meadows." Olivia Thompkins, I wasn't sure what to make of the letter. Was it a genuine expression of remorse or a calculated attempt to improve her standing with the parole board years down the line? I decided to share it with the board, but not the wider community. Reopening old wounds seemed unnecessary. Life in Suncrest Meadows gradually returned to normal, although normal had a new definition now. Our monthly HOA meetings, once sparsely attended affairs dominated by Olivia's monologues, were now well-attended forums for constructive community discussion. The focus shifted from punitive enforcement to collaborative problem-solving. The experience changed me, too. I became more engaged with local governance beyond just our HOA, eventually running for and winning a seat on the Phoenix City Council on a platform of transparency and community oversight. The skills I developed during the Olivia Thompkins investigation, researching public records, organizing community action, working with law enforcement, proved invaluable in my new role. Sometimes, when I drive through the entrance to our community and see the freshly landscaped common areas, the well-maintained pool, and neighbors chatting amiably in their front yards, I think about how close we came to losing it all. Not just financially, but the sense of community that makes a neighborhood more than just a collection of houses. 3 years after Olivia's conviction, I received a call from Detective Williams, now promoted to sergeant. She wanted to let me know that Olivia had been transferred to a minimum security facility after exhibiting model behavior. She was participating in a financial literacy program, teaching fellow inmates about responsible money management, an irony not lost on either of us. "The prosecutor wanted you to know that your testimony was crucial," Sergeant Williams said. "This case has become a textbook example for prosecutors handling HOA fraud. Unfortunately, it's more common than people realize." I thought about the thousands of homeowners associations across America, managing billions of dollars with varying degrees of oversight. Our case was extreme, certainly, but how many smaller-scale abuses were happening undetected? How many boards were making questionable financial decisions without proper scrutiny? On the 5th anniversary of our investigation, our HOA hosted a community celebration, not to commemorate the scandal, but to celebrate what we had built in its aftermath. The event featured food trucks, local musicians, and activities for children, all properly budgeted and approved through our now transparent processes. As I watched families enjoying the festivities, Rachel Johnson joined me at my table. "You know what today really is, don't you?" she asked with a knowing smile. I nodded. 5 years since we exposed the embezzlement. And 5 years of running a responsible HOA, she added. Our reserves are healthy, our amenities are well maintained, and our fees have actually decreased slightly 2 years running. It's something to be proud of. She was right. From the ashes of financial disaster, we had created something worthwhile, a true community. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I found myself chatting with Karen Davis, yes, the same Karen who once reported me for my oversized mailbox. Remarkably, we had become allies of sorts over the years, with Karen channeling her attention to detail into the role of community safety coordinator. "You know, Jack, I sometimes wonder if we should thank Olivia," she said, surprising me. Not for stealing, obviously, but because before all this happened, we weren't really a community. We were just people who happened to live in the same development and complained about each other's yards. There was some truth to that observation. Crisis has a way of either tearing people apart or bringing them together, and in our case, it had ultimately united us. The neighbors I once barely spoke to were now friends. The board meetings I used to avoid were now forums I looked forward to. Even Karen, once the neighborhood nemesis, was now an appreciated member of our community fabric. As I walked home that night, I reflected on the unlikely journey from suspicious homeowner to community leader. I remembered the fear I felt confronting Olivia at that first meeting, the shock when Philip revealed the extent of the theft, the tension of waiting to hear if she'd be caught at the border, and the vindication of seeing justice served. But mostly, I thought about the ordinary people who had come together to save their neighborhood retirees, working parents, young couples, none of us experts in finance or law enforcement, but all of us committed to uncovering the truth. The lights were on in houses throughout Suncrest Meadows as I walked. Through windows, I could see families gathered in living rooms, friends sharing meals on patios, children playing before bedtime. Normal, everyday scenes that somehow felt more precious knowing how close we'd come to losing the community that made them possible. The lessons of the Thompkins case stayed with me. Trust is essential but must be coupled with verification. Systems need checks and balances. And most importantly, a community is only as strong as the involvement of its members. Olivia Thompkins would serve her full 12-year sentence, minus time off for good behavior. The money she stole, while largely recovered, represented more than just financial loss. It represented a betrayal of the trust neighbors place in each other. As I reached my home, I paused to look at my front yard. The lawn was green again, the flowers blooming. My mailbox, now fully compliant with HOA regulations, stood at the exact height specified in our guidelines. But these details no longer seemed like arbitrary rules imposed by a power-hungry board. They were part of a shared agreement among neighbors about how we wanted our community to look and function. I thought about Olivia sitting in her cell in California, perhaps reflecting on her choices. I wondered if she ever thought about the community she left behind, not just the money she took, but the people whose trust she violated. I hoped that her apology letter reflected genuine remorse and that perhaps, someday, she would find a way to make more meaningful amends. In the end, the story of Suncrest Meadows wasn't just about an embezzlement scheme uncovered or a criminal brought to justice. It was about a community rediscovering its voice, reclaiming its power, and rebuilding on a foundation of transparency and mutual respect. As I unlocked my front door, I thought about the next HOA meeting on my calendar. We would be discussing plans for a community garden, a proposal for solar panels on the community center, and adjustments to the landscaping budget. Ordinary, even boring topics, and I was grateful for every mundane minute of it.